After decades of silence, at 86 years old, Lee Majors finally broke the quiet that followed him for most of his life. What he revealed about Farrah Fawcett, the woman who wants to find an era of beauty, fame, and heartbreak, stunned even those who thought they already knew their story. For years, Hollywood remembered them as the perfect couple, the rugged TV hero and the golden-haired angel. But behind the glossy magazine covers and the red carpet smiles was a story much more complicated, one that neither of them ever fully told while Farrah was alive. Now, with time softening the edges of memory, Lee's reflection pulls back the curtain on a love that was as fragile as it was legendary. The story begins in the glamour-soaked 1970s, a time when television ruled American living rooms. Lee Majors was the face of the $6 million man, a symbol of strength, courage, and control. Farrah Fawcett, meanwhile, was fast becoming the world's most recognizable woman, her smile and wind-swept hair printed on dorm room walls and bedroom posters across the globe. Together, they were Hollywood royalty, the handsome leading man and the dazzling beauty who could light up a room with a glance. They were photographed everywhere, walking hand in hand at award shows, laughing at industry parties, sharing quiet moments between shoots. To the outside world, theirs was a dream marriage, passion and perfection rolled into one iconic image. But the truth behind that image was far more human. The pressures of fame, endless separations, and two soaring careers built on constant attention slowly toward the fabric of their relationship. Beneath the surface, love battled ambition, and affection turned into distance. When the camera stopped flashing, they were just two people trying to hold on to something that fame was quietly pulling apart. In this video, we'll explore how their love story began, why it unraveled, and what Lee Majors finally admitted, the regret he carried for years after Farrah's untimely passing. This isn't tabloid gossip or recycled rumor. It's a story about love in the spotlight, about the cost of chasing dreams, and the haunting truth that only time and age could finally reveal. Lee Majors' story begins far from Hollywood's lights, in Wyandotte, Michigan, where he was born Harvey Leary on April 23, 1939. Tragedy struck early. Both his parents died before he turned 2, and he was adopted by an aunt and uncle who raised him in Kentucky. Growing up, Lee didn't dream of red carpets or cameras. His heart was set on football. He earned a scholarship to Indiana University and later transferred to Eastern Kentucky University, where he studied history and physical education. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A serious back injury during a college football game ended his athletic ambitions and, in an unexpected twist, pushed him toward a new field, acting. After graduation, Lee moved to Los Angeles, working behind the scenes as a recreation director while auditioning for small roles. His persistence paid off in 1965 when he landed the part Heath Barkley in The Big Valley, starring alongside Barbara Stanwyck. The role made him a household name. Lee's rugged looks, quiet strength, and natural charm earned him fans across the country. The series ran until 1969, setting the stage for an even bigger break a few years later, one that would define his career and turn him into an international icon. In 1973, he became Steve Austin, the bionic man in The $6 Million Man. The show was a cultural phenomenon, blending science fiction, heroism, and human emotion. It made Lee Majors one of television's biggest stars of the decade. His fame skyrocketed, and so did his workload. Between filming, press tours, and personal projects, Lee barely had time to breathe. Determined to have more creative control, he formed his own production company, Fawcett Majors Productions, alongside his then-wife, Farrah Fawcett. It was a bold move that sometimes caused tension with studios, but showed his drive to shape his own career. Even years later, Lee's resilience remained evident. In 2003, he survived a heart bypass surgery, another reminder of how many battles, both personal and professional, he had quietly fought and won. While Lee was carving his path in Hollywood, Farrah Fawcett's story was unfolding hundreds of miles away in Corpus Christi, Texas. Born on February 2, 1947, she grew up the younger of 2 daughters in a close-knit family. She was the kind of person people noticed instantly, graceful, athletic, and effortlessly beautiful. After studying art at the University of Texas, she was encouraged by a talent scout to try her luck in Los Angeles. In 1968, at just 21, she packed her bags and left Texas for Hollywood. Her start was modest. Small television commercials, bit parts in shows like The Flying Nun and I Dream of Jeannie, and print modeling gigs. Yet there was something magnetic about her presence, the kind of natural charisma that no camera could ignore. That spark paid off in 1976 when she landed the role of Jill Monroe in Charlie's Angels. Overnight, Farrah became a phenomenon. Her feathered blonde hair, soon dubbed the Farrah Flip, was copied by millions. And when she posed for that famous red swimsuit poster, it became the best-selling image of the decade, turning her into the face of American beauty. Despite her success, Farrah yearned for more than the glamorous image Hollywood gave her. After just one season, she left Charlie's Angels in 1977, a decision that shocked fans and fueled speculation. Officially, she cited creative frustration and an eagerness to take on more challenging roles. Privately, friends say the exhausting schedule and time apart from Lee Majors strained their marriage. Whatever the reason, her departure marked a turning point, both in her career and in their story together. By the late 1970s, Lee Majors was one of television's biggest stars, and Farrah Fawcett was the most famous woman in the world. Two meteors streaking across the Hollywood sky, destined to collide, and eventually to burn out. It was the late 1960s, a decade when Hollywood glittered with promise and ambition, when Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett first crossed paths. Both were young, good-looking, and at the cusp of stardom, but their meeting wasn't one of those orchestrated studio setups. As the story goes, it was a publicist who introduced them, thinking their personalities might complement each other. He was already known from the Big Valley, a rugged television cowboy with a quiet confidence. She was a Texas newcomer whose smile could disarm anyone. From the first evening they met, there was instant electricity. Lee, the strong and composed Southern gentleman, was captivated by Farrah's energy and warmth. Farrah, in turn, found in Lee a steadiness that contrasted with the chaos of early Hollywood life. Years later, she would recall that on their first date, she melted into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't just attraction, it was connection. Through the late 1960s and early 1970s, as they both climbed the Hollywood ladder, their romance grew in parallel with their careers. They were opposites in many ways. He preferred privacy and structure. She thrived in spontaneity and charm, yet somehow they balanced each other. When Lee's career gained traction with the Big Valley and later the $6 Million Man, Farrah became his biggest supporter. She attended premieres, beamed during interviews, and stayed by his side when fame brought pressure. Meanwhile, she was beginning to find her own path, doing television commercials and magazine shoots that hinted at her eventual breakout. Together, they were becoming a Hollywood power couple before the world even realized it. By the early 1970s, their love story seemed destined for forever. On July 28, 1973, Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett married in a small but elegant ceremony in Bel Air, surrounded by friends and family. For Lee, it was his second marriage. For Farrah, her first. From that day on, she was known as Farrah Fawcett Majors, a name that graced every credit, poster, and magazine cover for the next 6 years. They became the image of Hollywood perfection. Tall, sun-kissed, endlessly photogenic. At premieres and award shows, they looked inseparable, the kind of couple people dreamed about but rarely saw in real life. Their marriage coincided with both of their careers reaching their peaks. Lee was the face of the $6 Million Man, a global hit that made him a household name. Farrah, meanwhile, was on the verge of superstardom herself. The couple was featured in glossy magazines, their Malibu home often described as a haven for two stars who somehow managed to stay grounded. Yet behind the glamour, the cracks were already forming. Fame, while dazzling, can be isolating, and both Lee and Farrah were learning how demanding success could be. Still, in those early years, there were moments of genuine magic. Farrah appeared as a guest star in a few episodes of The $6 Million Man. Their on-screen chemistry as evident as it was off-screen. Friends recalled that when they were together, they looked utterly in sync, laughing, finishing each other's sentences, showing small gestures of affection that seemed sincere rather than staged. Lee, protected by nature, often tried to shield Farrah from the harsher side of Hollywood. The gossip, the relentless paparazzi, the industry expectations. And she, in turn, brought lightness to his life, balancing his discipline with humor and warmth. As the 1970s unfolded, their visibility made them tabloid gold. Magazines dubbed them Hollywood's golden couple, photographing them everywhere, stepping out of sports cars, hosting friends at their home, walking hand in hand on red carpets. But with every photo came more pressure. Farrah's fame exploded when Charlie's Angels premiered in 1976, instantly transforming her from a rising actress into a global sensation. Suddenly, she was not just Lee Majors' wife. She was a star in her own right. The demands of their careers meant that they spent more and more time apart. Lee was often filming The $6 Million Man on grueling schedules, while Farrah's commitments to Charlie's Angels and other projects kept her equally busy. Paparazzi followed her everywhere, and interviewers constantly asked about their marriage. Through it all, they tried to maintain an image of unity. In public, they were affectionate and composed. In private, the weight of their separate worlds began to show. Still, during those golden years, they were deeply connected. Two people who genuinely loved each other but were being pulled in opposite directions by fame. For a while, love was enough to keep them together. Their marriage represented the dream of balancing success and happiness, of finding warmth amid the glare of the spotlight. Yet, as the decade moved forward, the very forces that had made them Hollywood royalty would also begin to tear them apart. By the late 1970s, the shine around Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett's marriage had started to dim. What had once seemed like the perfect Hollywood love story was quietly being tested by the very forces that had helped create it: fame, distance, and the relentless pressure to stay on top. Lee Majors was by then a certified television phenomenon. The $6 Million Man wasn't just another primetime hit. It was a global sensation, with tie-in toys, comic books, and syndication deals that kept him in front of cameras nearly year-round. The workload was grueling. Long days on set, promotional tours, and little downtime. Farrah, meanwhile, was beginning to feel the limits of her success. Charlie's Angels had made her an overnight icon, but fame came with a cost. Beneath the glamorous veneer, she was growing restless. She didn't want to be remembered only for her smile, her hair, or her swimsuit poster. She wanted more: challenging scripts, complex characters, and creative freedom that television rarely allowed women at the time. Their careers, once complementary, began to pull them in opposite directions. When Lee was filming, Farrah was often across town or out of state, working on photo shoots, commercials, or meetings for potential film projects. The separations were frequent and long, making it harder to maintain the intimacy that had once come so naturally. Phone calls replaced dinners, and brief visits replaced shared routines. Friends noticed that while they still spoke warmly of each other in public, they were increasingly living separate lives. As Farrah's ambition grew, she found herself clashing with a system that had both made and confined her. Her role as Jill Monroe on Charlie's Angels had catapulted her to superstardom, but it also came with strict contracts and little control. By the end of the first season, Farrah was frustrated with the creative direction and the limited depth of her character. She wanted to take risks, to act in films, to prove she was more than just a television beauty. But walking away from Charlie's Angels meant going up against one of television's most powerful networks, ABC, and its production company, Aaron Spelling Productions. In 1977, Farrah made the bold decision to leave the show after just one season. It was a scandal at the time. ABC filed a lawsuit claiming breach of contract. The tabloid spun endless stories about ego, money, and betrayal. But Farrah stood her ground, insisting she needed to grow as an actress. Behind the headlines, though, the decision also had a personal cost. Her departure coincided with growing distance in her marriage to Lee. He was busy filming The $6 Million Man, while she was negotiating lawsuits and trying to rebuild her career on her own terms. Their lives had become a whirlwind of separate obligations and expectations. Lee, for his part, was known for his discipline and privacy, qualities that had once made him a dependable anchor for Farrah. But as her star power began to eclipse his, tension quietly brewed. Sources later described Lee as protective, sometimes possessive, and deeply uncomfortable with the level of attention Farrah was receiving, not just from fans, but from her male co-stars and the media. Farrah, always fiercely loyal, began to feel boxed in by those expectations. She wanted independence, creative control, and the ability to define herself outside her marriage. What had once been endearing, his protectiveness, her charm, began to feel like friction. By 1978, the cracks were visible. Publicly, they still appeared together at events, smiling for cameras, exuding the same golden glow that had made them Hollywood's ideal couple. But privately, the emotional distance was undeniable. Friends of the couple recall how their conversations turned more transactional, more polite than personal. Their once passionate connection was being replaced by routine. Lee's world revolved around his show and the demands of the production schedule. Farrah's revolved around reclaiming her career and identity. There were also the inevitable pressures of living under constant public scrutiny. Every gesture was analyzed, every absence questioned. The tabloids speculated endlessly about their marriage, labeling them too famous to stay together. Farrah, once adored for her warmth and relatability, was now being portrayed as difficult or ungrateful for walking away from Charlie's Angels. Lee, meanwhile, was framed as the stoic husband trying to hold things together. The truth, as always, was more complex. Their differences in personality, ambition, and emotional needs had grown too wide to bridge easily. Lee had built his life around structure and control. Farrah was learning to embrace change and creative risk. The more she pushed for independence, the more the foundation of their marriage began to shake. By the end of the decade, what had once been a story of shared dreams was slowly becoming a story of two people evolving in separate directions. What began as one of Hollywood's most glamorous partnerships was now showing the quiet, human cracks beneath the surface. The golden couple of the 70s was learning that fame can magnify not just success, but also loneliness, and that even love, when tested by distance and ambition, can start to fade in the glare of the spotlight. By 1979, the golden couple that once embodied the glamour of 1970s Hollywood had reached its breaking point. Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett, whose love story had played out in glossy magazine spreads and on red carpets, were now quietly living separate lives. The distance that had once been caused by work schedules and fame had turned into something more permanent, emotional detachment. After nearly 6 years of marriage, they announced their separation. And for fans around the world, it was a shock that symbolized the end of an era. Their separation wasn't marked by scandal or bitterness, at least not publicly. In fact, both Lee and Farrah handled it with remarkable restraint. They didn't attack each other in the press or trade accusations. Instead, they let silence speak for them, a silence that left room for endless speculation. Even as they parted, Farrah continued to use the name Farrah Fawcett Majors in her professional credits, a sign that she hadn't completely let go of that chapter of her life. It was as though she wanted to honor what they had shared, even as she stepped into her next act. While Farrah was carving out a post-Charlie's Angels identity, Lee was still one of television's most recognizable faces. The $6 Million Man had ended in 1978, but Lee soon returned to TV with The Fall Guy in 1981. A new hit series that gave him a second wind in his career. The show, about a Hollywood stuntman who moonlighted as a bounty hunter, became another cultural favorite, reinforcing Lee's reputation as one of television's enduring icons. But even in his new show, the ghost of his past love lingered. The theme song for The Fall Guy, titled The Unknown Stuntman and performed by Majors himself, contained a now famous lyric, "I've been seen with Farrah." It was a small line, but it carried immense weight. It wasn't a boast. It was a wink to the audience, a nostalgic nod to the woman who had once been his partner in both love and fame. It showed that even amid success and reinvention, Farrah still held a place in the story. Their divorce became official on February 16, 1982. They had no children together, which perhaps made the process less complicated legally, but emotionally, it was a deep fracture. Neither of them spoke much publicly about the reasons behind their split, and when they did, their words were carefully measured. Lee once admitted that the demands of their careers and the time spent apart had taken a toll they couldn't repair. Farrah, in her understated way, acknowledged that while they had loved deeply, their lives had moved in different directions. After the divorce, both tried to rebuild and redefine their identities apart from one another. Lee continued his television career with steady success, and Farrah transitioned into more serious film and stage roles, determined to prove her range as an actress. She starred in The Burning Bed in 1984, a powerful television film that earned her Emmy and Golden Globe nominations and completely changed how the public viewed her. No longer just a smiling poster girl, Farrah was now being recognized as a serious dramatic performer, and in many ways, this reinvention was her quiet triumph. Still, despite their separation, the bond between Lee and Farrah never fully disappeared from public consciousness. They remain linked in Hollywood's collective memory as one of its most iconic pairs, the handsome hero and the golden goddess. When Farrah's later life brought health struggles, and especially during her battle with cancer, the media often revisited her relationship with Lee as part of her life story. He, too, would occasionally be asked about her, and though he rarely spoke in depth, his tone was always respectful, even affectionate. In many ways, their relationship came to represent something timeless. Not a failed romance, but a human one. Two people who met young, loved intensely, and then were pulled apart by the magnitude of the world they lived in. Their marriage ended, but their connection never fully vanished. Looking back, the end of their marriage wasn't so much an explosion as a quiet unraveling, the result of two stars burning too brightly in different directions. And while their love story had concluded on paper by 1982, it would live on in memories, music, and the cultural fabric of time, a poignant reminder that even in Hollywood, not all beautiful stories have perfect endings. After their divorce, Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett's lives moved in separate directions, yet both continue to live under the glow and sometimes the shadow of their shared fame. What they had built together in the 1970s still followed them, but now each began a new chapter defined by resilience, reinvention, and in Farrah's case, immense personal courage. For Lee Majors, the years after his split from Farrah were a mixture of continued success and quiet rebuilding. Professionally, he remained a recognizable and respected name in television. The Fall Guy, which began airing in 1981, became a long-running hit and cemented his place as one of the most reliable action stars of the small screen. After the series ended in 1986, Lee stayed active in Hollywood, appearing in numerous guest and recurring roles across film and television, from Tour Duty and Raising Hope to Ash vs. Evil Dead decades later. He even returned for several $6 Million Man reunion films, reminding audiences of the character that had made him a household name. But beyond the spotlight, Lee's personal life underwent major changes. In 1988, 6 years after his divorce from Farrah, he married model and playmate Karen Valles. Their marriage produced 3 children, a daughter, Nikki, and twin sons, Dane and Trey. For a time, Lee seemed to have found a quieter, more grounded domestic life, far from the frenzy of the 1970s tabloids. However, that relationship, too, came to an end, and the couple divorced in 1994. Lee also had an older son, Lee Majors II, from his first marriage to Kathy Robinson. His oldest child briefly followed in his father's footsteps, acting in television and film. Despite the multiple changes in his personal life, Lee's role as a father became one of the constants in his later years. In 2002, Lee Majors married actress and model Faith Noel Cross, a partnership that has endured into his later life. Their marriage has often been described as peaceful and supportive, a far cry from the high-pressure world of his earlier years. Even in his 80s, Lee has continued to make occasional public appearances, charming fans with his trademark humor and humility. Health challenges eventually came knocking. In 2003, Majors underwent heart bypass surgery, a serious, life-changing operation that reminded him of his own mortality. Following his recovery, he slowed down his work pace but never truly retired. For a time, he also explored business ventures, including a partial ownership stake in the Los Angeles Express of the United States Football League, USFL, showing his entrepreneurial side beyond acting. Farrah Fawcett's post-divorce years, meanwhile, took a very different and far more public path. In the early 1980s, she began a relationship with actor Ryan O'Neal, another larger-than-life Hollywood figure. Their romance was passionate, complicated, and sometimes turbulent. They had one son, Redmond James Fawcett O'Neill, born in 1985. Like Farrah's own rise to fame, her relationship with Ryan was closely watched and often dissected by the press. They separated and reconciled multiple times, but despite the volatility, there was no denying their enduring bond. Professionally, Farrah worked tirelessly to transform her image. No longer content with being remembered as a poster girl, she began taking on heavy, dramatic roles that shocked critics who had once dismissed her as a lightweight. Her performance in The Burning Bed in 1984, where she portrayed a battered wife fighting back against domestic abuse, earned her widespread critical acclaim and an Emmy nomination. It was a defining moment in her career, one that proved her talent and depth as an actress. She followed it with equally powerful roles in Extremities 1986 and Small Sacrifices 1989, earning further awards recognition. Behind the professional triumphs, however, her personal life was marked by struggles with relationships, with fame, and eventually with her health. In 2006, Farrah was diagnosed with anal cancer, a devastating illness that she initially chose to fight privately. When the disease later spread to her liver, her battle became both physical and emotional. Yet even in the midst of suffering, she showed remarkable courage. Her strength and vulnerability were captured in the candid 2009 NBC documentary Farrah's Story, which detailed her treatment and determination to keep fighting. On June 25, 2009, Farrah Fawcett passed away at the age of 62, surrounded by loved ones. Her death came just hours before the passing of another pop culture giant, Michael Jackson. But for millions around the world, the loss of Farrah was deeply personal. She had been more than a Hollywood beauty. She had been a symbol of resilience, authenticity, and quiet bravery. Lee Majors, when asked about her years later, spoke with deep respect and emotion. She was an angel long before Charlie's Angels, he once said. Though their paths had diverged long ago, his words made it clear the love, admiration, and shared history between them had never truly faded. In the decades following their divorce, both Lee and Farrah found their own forms of peace. His came in longevity and stability, hers in legacy and courage. And though their lives after each other were full of new loves, triumph, and pain, they would always remain linked in the hearts of those who remembered them, not just as stars, but as two people who once loved, lost, and ultimately lived extraordinary lives. For decades after their divorce, Lee Majors maintained a steadfast silence about his marriage to Farrah Fawcett. It wasn't bitterness or denial, it was restraint. In an era when Hollywood couples often turned heartbreak into headlines, Lee did the opposite. He retreated, focusing on his work, his family, and later, his quiet life away from the noise of stardom. Yet that very silence created a mystery around their story. Fans remember the dazzling photographs, the interviews filled with laughter and affection, and the fairy tale image of a perfect couple. But what really happened between them remained one of Hollywood's most whispered questions. Lee rarely opened up about the emotional core of their relationship. For him, the past was private, something sacred that didn't belong to tabloids or talk shows. Even when asked directly, he would deflect with grace, offering polite but measured answers. When Farrah's name came up, his tone would soften, his words gentle. He didn't dwell on the pain or the problems. Instead, he spoke of admiration, of her talent, her humor, and her light. It was as though, by keeping the details unsaid, he was protecting not only her memory, but a version of their love that existed before fame began to fray it. Over the years, the public crafted its own versions of what went wrong. Hollywood thrives on myth-making, and the Majors' Fawcett marriage became one of its enduring legends. Rumors spread that Lee's protective nature had turned controlling, that Farrah's ambitions outgrew their partnership, that jealousy and distance had quietly eroded their bond. Others painted a more sympathetic picture. Two good people caught in the machinery of fame, unable to stay close when their careers pulled them in opposite directions. The truth, of course, was far more complex than any tabloid headline. They had been young, ambitious, and constantly under scrutiny. Both were reaching the heights of fame at the exact same moment, an intoxicating but volatile combination. Their lives were scheduled to minute, their privacy non-existent, their time together fleeting. Every missed dinner, every late-night shoot, every gossip headline added weight to a relationship already stretched thin. By the 1980s and 1990s, the media had largely shifted its attention to Farrah's new roles and relationships. Lee, meanwhile, continued to work steadily in television, but remained personally guarded. When interviewers brought up his ex-wife, he never spoke with resentment. In one rare moment, he admitted that the constant separations had made it difficult to sustain intimacy, calling it a marriage that couldn't survive Hollywood's pace. That understated acknowledgement carried the weight of experience, the kind of quiet honesty that comes only after years of reflection. Still, the myths endured. Fans argued over who was to blame. Gossip magazines revived the story whenever either appeared in public, and new generations rediscovered their romance through old photographs. But what neither Lee nor Farrah ever did was turn their story into spectacle. They didn't publish tell-all books or trade accusations in interviews. Their silence was, in its own way, an act of dignity, a refusal to let something deeply personal become entertainment. As time passed, that silence took on a different meaning. To some, it seemed like avoidance. To others, it was respect. The quiet understanding that love, even when it ends, remains something private. When Farrah fell ill and her cancer diagnosis became public in 2006, Lee never sought attention by commenting on it. Those close to him said he followed her story quietly, offering support through mutual friends, but keeping his distance out of respect for her life with Ryan O'Neal. Now, at 86, the years have softened the sharp edges of Lee's past. The man once known for his stoic demeanor and action hero roles now speaks with more openness, more reflection. In occasional interviews, he acknowledges the deep emotional connection he and Farrah shared, and the pain of watching her suffer later in life. She was a wonderful lady, he said simply, and she's missed. Those few words, though understated, carried decades of emotion. They were the words of a man who had lived long enough to understand that love and loss are not opposites, but intertwined truths. Aging brings perspective, and for Lee Majors, that perspective is tinged with gratitude and quiet regret. He has seen fame rise and fade, friends come and go, and time reshape the memories he once held close. What remains is not bitterness or nostalgia, but a sense of acceptance of how life, in all its beauty and heartbreak, leaves its mark on the soul. In the end, the silence between Lee and Farrah may say more than words ever could. It wasn't emptiness. It was reverence, a shared understanding that their story, however imperfect, was real. It was love caught in the glare of the cameras, tested by ambition, and preserved in memory. And now, with Lee reflecting openly in his later years, that silence finally feels less like an absence, and more like a tribute to the woman who wants to find his brightest days. The emotional state reflected in these admissions appears to be one of quiet reflection, humility, and wistfulness. Lee Majors, now an elder figure accustomed to fame's afterglow, no longer needs to guard every word. Age often softens defensiveness, and in his case, seems to bring clarity. He isn't seeking blame so much as understanding. He seems to regret that their love was compromised by external forces, busy schedules, physical distance, the machinery of the entertainment industry, more than by any single betrayal. These statements confirm some rumors, e.g. that they saw very little of each other, that career demands came between them, but they do not confirm more dramatic stories like infidelity on either side, or any deeply hidden scandal that has been widely reported in tabloids. They nuance the narratives, bringing things into human scale. Not perfect, not innocent, but not monstrous either. From Farrah's perspective, we only have her past words in interviews, she often hinted at frustration. She left Charlie's Angels after one season, in part because she felt constrained by her character, wanted more artistic freedom, and resented being typecast. So her view would probably emphasize her need for independence and creative fulfillment. Lee's recent remarks align with that. He acknowledges those pressures and the cost they incurred in their relationship. Emotionally, these admissions reframe their story not as a clean fault line of right and wrong, but as one of sorrow, misunderstanding, and what happens when love collides with ambition. When Lee says he saw Farrah just 2 weeks in 1 year, that's a heart-rending detail. It's not dramatic. It's real. It carries a weight many can relate to. Love deferred, priorities diverted, choices made for work that cost private connection. Though there is no single blockbuster confession, e.g. she cheated or he didn't care, What emerges is a portrait of regret, for missed dinners, sleepless nights, for the moments they couldn't share. For Lee, perhaps the worst are not the public moments, but the private ones lost, the silence in their home, the mutual loneliness. These are the confessions of emotional truth, rather than scandalous revelation. In the decades since their separation and divorce, Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett have remained indelibly etched into the fabric of American pop culture. Two names forever linked by the golden glow of 1970s television, Hollywood beauty, and an aura of tragic nostalgia. Their story endures not merely because they were famous, but because they embodied an era. He, the rugged, square-jawed hero, the $6 million man. She, the all-American angel whose poster adorned millions of walls and symbolized both innocence and independence. Together, they became a sort of television royalty, one that later fractured but never faded from collective memory. Even today, their relationship still feels strangely present, appearing in documentaries, magazine retrospectives, and fan tributes. Lee Majors' legacy remains tied to his pioneering work in action television. The $6 million man not only made him a household name, but also helped define the action hero archetype for an entire generation. His later role in The Fall Guy cemented his place in entertainment history as a symbol of both toughness and humor. Meanwhile, Farrah Fawcett's legacy evolved in more complex ways. What began with her dazzling smile and red swimsuit poster became something deeper when she defied expectations. Leaving Charlie's Angels after one season pursued serious acting. Her performances in The Burning Bed and Small Sacrifices prove she was more than a pop culture icon. She was a performer of conviction and emotional depth. Their story even inspired unexpected corners of pop culture. The famous soul classic Midnight Train to Georgia has its roots in their lives. Songwriter Jim Weatherly once called Lee Majors home, and Farrah answered the phone. She mentioned she was taking a midnight plane to Houston, a casual remark that Weatherly later transformed into a song about love, sacrifice, and leaving fame behind. The lyric Spirit, about a dreamer giving up Hollywood to return home, feels hauntingly prophetic when viewed in the light of Lee and Farrah's real relationship. The title later changed from Plane to Train, but its emotional core remained the same: love strained by ambition, distance, and the price of chasing success. Even decades later, their names still echo through popular culture. The Beastie Boys reference Lee in their 2009 track, Lee Majors Come Again, a tongue-in-cheek nod to his status as a pop legend. Farrah, meanwhile, continues to inspire discussions about fame, feminism, and artistic courage, especially after her fearless battle with cancer and her openness in the 2009 documentary Farrah's Story. These lasting references speak to how deeply both touched the cultural imagination. When Lee Majors finally broke his silence about their past, acknowledging the strain of distance, the regret of lost time, and the tender respect that remained, it subtly reshaped their shared legacy. His reflections didn't add scandal or spectacle. Instead, they added humanity. Hearing him admit, after decades of reticence, that fame pulled them apart and that he wished they'd had more time together deepened the world's understanding of their relationship. It turned a glamorous Hollywood love story into something more relatable. Two people doing their best under impossible circumstances, learning too late what truly mattered. That confession also challenges how audiences interpret celebrity relationships. The media once framed Lee and Farrah in archetypes, him as the stoic husband, her as the ambitious beauty, but his later honesty blurred those edges. It revealed that behind the photo spreads and magazine covers were two people struggling, just like anyone else, to balance love and career, public identity, and private truth. In that sense, his admission becomes not just about Farrah, but about how we remember all stars, as human beings capable of mistakes, longing, and forgiveness. For audiences, their story continues to resonate because it mirrors universal themes: love constrained by time, the price of ambition, and the way silence can last longer than words. Fame, it turns out, doesn't shield anyone from heartbreak. It often magnifies it. Lee and Farrah's relationship reminds us that even the most beautiful connections can falter under the spotlight's heat, yet what remains is a tenderness of memory. In the end, their legacy is twofold. It's cinematic and cultural, spanning hit shows, unforgettable images, and enduring songs. But it's also emotional, a reminder that even icons live fragile, Human stories behind the gloss. Lee Majors' late-life confession, modest yet heartfelt, adds a final layer to that legacy. It's a reminder that love stories don't always end with closure, but sometimes, even after decades of silence, a few honest words can bring peace to what once was left unsaid. Even with Lee Majors' recent reflections and his willingness, at 86, to speak more openly about his past with Farrah Fawcett, there are still many unanswered questions, truth perhaps too complex or too painful to ever be fully revealed. His confession offers emotional honesty, but it remains filtered through the lens of memory. Decades have passed since those whirlwind years of fame and heartbreak, and time can both heal and blur the sharp edges of reality. What he shared may be less about facts and about feelings, his way of finding peace with a story that the world has analyzed for half a century. Every confession carries limits. Lee's version, sincere as it sounds, represents one perspective among many. He might have chosen to focus on affection, regret, and nostalgia rather than on darker or more complicated elements. Public figures, especially those who have lived their entire adult lives under scrutiny, often learn how to speak carefully, balancing truth with dignity. It's entirely possible that he softened certain details or omitted moments that could reopen old wounds or invite sensationalism. After all, Farrah Fawcett is no longer here to share her own version, to clarify or contest the subtleties of what truly happened behind closed doors. There have long been rumors and whispers about infidelity, emotional strain, jealousy, and the toll of celebrity lifestyles. But none have ever been fully verified. When Farrah was alive, she rarely discussed a breakdown of her marriage in depth. Her interviews were often measured, graceful, and focused on her career rather than her personal heartbreak. Even in her most candid moments, she preferred to move forward rather than linger on the past. Other voices complicate the narrative. Ryan O'Neal, her longtime partner after Lee, spoke publicly about their relationship in her final years, often painting a picture of enduring love but also turmoil. Friends and colleagues from both sides have shared impressions that sometimes align with Lee's account and other times contradict it. Biographers and journalists have noted that, as with most celebrity relationships, truth often becomes tangled in myth, pride, and public image. Ultimately, what we're left with is not a single definitive story, but a mosaic of perspectives. Lee Majors' late-life confession doesn't settle the mystery surrounding their love. Instead, it adds another piece to the puzzle. It reveals that even decades later, the emotions remain vivid. Love, regret, and respect all intertwined. For viewers and fans, the lesson is not to seek one absolute truth, but to understand that human relationships, especially under the blinding lights of fame, are rarely simple. His words remind us that some stories will always remain partly unfinished, yet their power lies precisely in that lingering sense of wonder and uncertainty. Their story, from its dazzling beginnings to its bittersweet end, feels like a complete emotional circle, a journey through love, fame, heartbreak, and, finally, reflection. Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett began as Hollywood's golden couple, the embodiment of success and beauty in the 1970s. They seemed untouchable, perfectly cast in the world's imagination. But behind the glamour lay the very human challenges that fame magnifies: distance, ambition, pride, and the quiet ache of growing apart. Over the decades, their love story transformed into a kind of legend, one remembered through photographs, film clips, and wistful recollections rather than lived moments. Now, at 86, Lee Majors has broken the silence that once surrounded their relationship. His confession isn't about uncovering scandal or rewriting history. It's about truth and closure. Speaking openly after so many years feels like an act of grace, a way of acknowledging the love and pain that shaped both their lives. It's a reminder that even after decades, reflection can bring peace, and that love, even when it doesn't last, can leave a mark that endures long after fame fades. Farrah Fawcett may be gone, but her presence remains powerful. Her strength, independence, and artistry continue to inspire. Hearing Lee's words now allows us to see beyond the glossy magazine covers and television images, to glimpse two people who once meant everything to each other. So, what do you think of Lee's confession? Did it change how you see their story? Or does it make their love feel even more timeless? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and revisit some of their old interviews to hear their voices side by side. And as the screen fades to black, maybe it's best to leave viewers with one final image. Lee and Farrah, young and smiling, unaware of what was to come, a picture of love that, despite everything, still lingers in the heart.